You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So Glenn, we've seen some absurd notions put forward by the Trump team in court, but nothing like this. Can you speak on what the Trump team just did?
Yeah, Brian, shockingly, Donald Trump's lawyers are trying to, you ready for this? Delay his trial. The thing is, this motion I would file under the heading of laughable, because what they say is there's been so much pretrial publicity. They call it prejudicial pretrial publicity. Of course, when the media reports information and evidence that tends to incriminate Donald Trump when it's reported accurately, the fact that it's prejudicial shouldn't be a surprise. But they say, there's been so much pretrial publicity, and it is so prejudicial that, Judge, you have to kick his trial well down the road. But Brian, let me just read you one sentence of their opening salvo, which exposes their motion for sort of the ridiculous ask that it is of Judge Merchan. They say that an adjournment of the trial date is necessary because of exceptionally prejudicial pretrial publicity, which is substantial, ongoing, and likely to increase. If it's likely to increase, if it's likely to get worse, seems to me you ought to start the trial on April 15th before the pretrial publicity increases. This is a downright silly motion for them to have filed. And our viewers may remember, Brian, we were talking some time ago about how Judge Merchan said, no more motions. If you want to file another motion, you have to ask permission of the court to file it. You have to give me a one-page summary, and I reserve the right to use your one-page summary as the motion itself, with the unspoken addition there being, and I will likely reject it. But Judge Merchan granted the motion. They're allowing Donald Trump's lawyers to file this one based on pretrial publicity, and Judge Merchan just ordered the prosecutors to respond. I think we're likely to see a response later today.
Okay, now, real quick question. This won't have any impact as of now on the trial starting on the 15th, is that right?
No, the answer is no, not unless Judge Merchan decides to grant it or decides to, grant a delay in the trial of a couple of weeks, which would make no sense even given Trump's own motion saying pretrial publicity is likely to increase.
All right, Glenn, the obvious question here, is there no acknowledgement by the Trump team that the only reason there is pretrial publicity, as they call it, is because they make it, that their client is the one posting threats on a daily basis to the judge and to the judge's daughter?
What we have learned, Brian, is we can never expect Trump lawyers to be fully forthcoming in the arguments they present to a court. Donald Trump posted, I believe, 77 times yesterday on Easter Sunday, celebrating Easter the way I think most people do, by railing against, berating, and calling names of all of the people who are engaged in the endeavor of trying to hold Donald Trump accountable for his crimes, for his conduct. So, who is it that's generating, the most pretrial publicity and, frankly, the most false, misleading pretrial publicity? That would be Donald Trump. But, of course, that doesn't seem to be a concern. It's more about the fact that, the media is reporting on what, the evidence is against Donald Trump. And they're talking about what horrible things he's done and how, he can't possibly return to the Oval Office where he said he'd be a dictator on day one, none of which is unfair. It's
right.
Just straight up commentary about the evidence and about Donald Trump's own statements and posts.
Right. I mean, it is crazy that he does something blatantly, egregiously illegal or criminal, and then when we talk about those things that he's done and speak about them in an accurate manner, he can point to those things and say, well, look, all of those people are talking about this stuff, and these people are clearly prejudiced against me for accurately reporting on all of the things I've said and done. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense on its face.
And Brian, we've seen this movie before. Remember a few months ago when Donald Trump was posting things about his D.C. federal prosecution and Washington, D.C. and its residents, hits kind of close to home for me. He said things like, oh my God, it's rat infested. There's garbage in the streets. The people of D.C. are horrible. I'm paraphrasing, but this was the flavor of what he was posting. And it's such an awful city that I'm just going to federally take it over when I'm president again. And then he complains about the people of D.C. being prejudiced against him. Think about it. I mean, if a defendant could orchestrate the prejudice against him and then use that very prejudice against him as a means to avoid or delay going to trial, that would be like us living in the upside down.
That was perfectly put. That kind of perfectly summarizes the insanity of the moment that we're living in right now. Glenn, is there any instance where pretrial publicity has ever been grounds for a dismissal?
Grounds for a dismissal, the answer is no. Now, I say that in knee-jerk fashion. Having been a prosecutor for 30 years, I've never heard of pretrial publicity being a grounds for dismissing a case. It just doesn't make any sense. You know, how it is the public is reacting or how it is the media is reporting about a particular defendant or a particular crime. I mean, that can't possibly give a defendant a legal basis to convince a judge that the charges against him must be dismissed and he should not have to stand trial. Here is the relief I have seen very, very rarely. It can result in what's called a change of venue. What does that mean? It means that if there is a crime that is committed that maybe doesn't have national profile, maybe it happened in a small town in, let me use Virginia, for example, and it's gotten so much media attention in that small town, in that community where the crime occurred, that a defendant might make a motion for a change of venue, meaning, you know what, Judge, the media has saturated our community with reporting about this crime, and it's going to be really hard for my client, the defendant, to get a fair trial, to select fair jurors who aren't so steeped in the facts of the case and who haven't already formed their opinions about the guilt of my client, that we would ask the court to move this case to another jurisdiction, another state, maybe where there has been little or no reporting about this local crime. Well, guess what, Brian? This ain't a local crime. Nothing Donald Trump has done is a local crime. It all has national and indeed international coverage and impact. So, you know, this kind of a motion, even if it might be granted in a lesser, smaller case, and only very, very rarely at that, it is not going to be a basis, in my opinion, for either moving the trial, for delaying the trial, that is, giving it more time, kicking it down the road, because the publicity is not going to subside. And there's no way in hell it will result in a dismissal of the charges against Donald Trump.
And to your earlier point, any of this publicity on an international stage is by design, thanks to him. He's trying to do it. So he can't then turn around and say, look, after an entire weekend of making sure that this is the only thing people are talking about, that is then a predicate to go ahead and dismiss this case. Then by Trump's logic, no celebrity could ever be tried in court. Is that right? Because, yeah. I mean, these are cases that have a ton of publicity.
If a crime being high profile, or somebody who's charged with a crime being so well known that the media covers his or her every move, it would result in a kind of a de facto rule that, well, you know what? If you're famous, I guess we just can't try you in a criminal case, because any criminal case is going to be steeped in publicity and everybody's going to know about the person, about the crime, about the charges. It's just not. That's not the way to run a criminal justice system, and it's certainly no way to run a democracy.
Yeah, or put another way, I guess the way that Trump would say it is, when you're a star, they let you do anything, right?
We've heard that before from him, haven't we?
Yeah. Glenn, they did a survey that they included in the motion. This is the Trump team. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, this, I was just on air a few minutes ago on MSNBC talking about this, and as I said, it really gave this old prosecutor a chuckle, because here is what Donald Trump's attorneys say, sort of in their opening salvo to Judge Merchan, trying to convince him that he needs to just kick the trial can well down the road. They say that they undertook a survey that included a sample of 400 residents of New York, and many of the potential jurors already wrongfully believe that President Trump is guilty of the crimes with which he's been charged.
I wonder why. Yeah.
Shocking.
Can't imagine what it must be. It must be the election interference and deep state interference by the Democrats. That can be the only reason I can think of.
Yeah, can you imagine a defendant who says, let me just take January 6th and the attack on the Capitol as an example. I can't get a fair trial because the people who saw me commit the crimes believed I committed the crimes. I mean, this is outrageous. Yeah. So let me just expose the ridiculousness of this claim. So I think what they're saying, I'm going to tease it out a little bit, is the jurors who are going to be called down to that Manhattan courthouse to sit in judgment of Donald Trump, they're not going to presume Donald Trump innocent because they've already seen the evidence reported, and they've concluded he's guilty. Well, first of all, if accurate reporting of the facts and the circumstances, together with what they've seen with their own eyes, together with Donald Trump's own consciousness of guilt statements and posts day after day after day, if that doesn't allow the people in the court of public opinion, the citizens, the batch of people that jurors will be drawn from, if that doesn't allow them to make a common sense decision, reach a conclusion based on all of that evidence that the person who's been indicted for the crimes actually committed the crimes, if that somehow disqualified jurors, then we kind of go back to the same point that, look, if you're popular enough, if you're well-known enough, if you're a celebrity or a highfalutin politician, you just can't be tried for your crimes. That's absurd. But I think what they're getting at is the presumption of innocence. And I think there's a popular misconception about what the presumption of innocence really means, and most importantly, Brian, where it applies. It's as if people think there is a presumption of innocence hanging in the air over everything, everyone, and every circumstance. I actually wrote a piece about this years ago in relation to Trump when people were screaming, I can't believe you're saying Trump did these horrible things. Isn't he presumed innocent? The answer is not in the court of public opinion. The only place the presumption of innocence applies is not only throughout the criminal justice system, but only when those 12 jurors are sitting in a jury box and they are sworn and the judge instructs them, ladies and gentlemen, you must presume the defendant innocent, not guilty of all charges, unless and until the prosecution presents evidence to you that proves beyond a reasonable doubt every element of every crime charged. The presumption of innocence follows the defendant throughout the entirety of the trial until you are convinced of his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Do you understand and can you abide by those instructions? That's part of both jury selection, and then it's reinforced when the jurors are in the box, they've been selected, and they're taking the oath to serve honestly and fairly and independently as jurors in the case. But Brian, not only does the presumption of innocence not apply in the court of public opinion, it doesn't even apply in the criminal justice system at the earlier stages of a case. You don't walk into a preliminary hearing, an early hearing, and ever hear anybody talk about the presumption of innocence because it doesn't apply. At those early stages of a hearing of a criminal case, the issue may be, is there probable cause to support the charges? The issue may be, is there clear and convincing evidence that the defendant presents a danger to the community or is a flight risk such that he must be detained pending trial? We don't talk about the presumption of innocence because it doesn't apply until the jury is in the box, they've been sworn, and they are now ready to undertake deciding the case.
All right, and let's finish off with this. For posterity here, are we still set for an April 15th jury selection, which would then go into the trial?
Absolutely. I haven't seen anything in this new defense motion. I haven't heard anything from Judge Juan Merchan, the presiding judge, during all of the prior status hearings in the case that would lead me to conclude Judge Merchan is going to budge by even one day on the trial date he has now set and affirmed, April 15th, to begin jury selection. And in fact, at the end of the last two status hearings in this case, Judge Merchan did something similar in each of those two hearings. when Donald Trump's lawyers started to spout out something that sounded more like a Donald Trump social media post, Judge, this is terrible. Nothing in the United States like this should ever be allowed to happen. The judge would cut him off and say, I've ruled. I'll see you on April 15th for the trial date. So I think Judge Merchan has Donald Trump's number. I don't think he's going to play Donald Trump's ridiculous delay games anymore. And I think we're finally going to see the first criminal trial against a former president of the United States commence on April 15th.
Well, we'll obviously be there to follow through the entire thing. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirschner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.